do a test. Can people online hear me okay? Hopefully.
Yes, thank you.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, if we're all ready to go, we shall begin. It says here, welcome and introductions. So welcome. My name is Oliver Coppard. I'm both the Mayor and the Chair of the ICP. I should probably say before we go further, at 10:15, I'm really sorry, I'm going to have to just leave for 15 minutes. We've got colleagues from Treasury visiting and I need to go and have a quick word to shake them down for some cash. So apologies, but Piers will chair in my absence. In terms of introductions, again, as usual, I'm not going to suggest we do a roundtable thing, but if you could please introduce yourself when you first speak, so everybody knows who you are, that would be really welcome. In terms of item 2, any declarations of interest to be shared? Has anybody bought significant holdings in a pharmaceutical company recently? No? Me neither. Item number 3, minutes of the previous meeting. Should we do it by exception? Does anybody have any objections or any additions, changes, alterations to the minutes? Anything you want changing? Happy to accept them. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. In which case, on to item number 4, questions from the public. Do we have any questions from the public, please? No. Thank you very much. In which case, on to item number 5, please. South Yorkshire Integrated Care Strategy from Will Cleary. Great.
Thanks, Oliver. And just by way of just sort of setting a bit of the agenda for this morning, I just thought it was helpful just to reflect on where we were last time, and just reminding ourselves of the strategy that was set out at the end of March as our initial integrated care strategy. And at the last session, we had some focus time on children and young people. So colleagues from 2 of our places joined us to present the work that they were doing around early years. So Rotherham and Doncaster colleagues came and did that. And also we had a presentation, didn't we, from our Children and Young People's Alliance. So it gave us a real sense of the amount of work that was already happening. And I start there because I think the reflection for us when we were developing our integrated care strategy was a recognition of all of the great work that is happening. But a real focus in this space around what we can do together to add value to that work. So I think last time we saw that in relation to children and young people. In terms of the last couple of months, I think the most substantive work that's been happening over that sort of period has been the development of the joint forward plan. So just to put that into context, our joint forward plan for South Yorkshire is intended to respond directly to our integrated care strategy. So that which we've set out around our bold ambitions, our focus around health inequalities, we should expect to see some of that coming out in our joint forward plan as a direct response from the NHS, but not only the NHS, but the NHS working with others. So I'll update later on this agenda where we've got to with that. I think it's also a reflection of the work that the operational group's been doing as well. So I'll just do a few reflections on that. Just a reminder, we established a bit of a doing group really to support the work of this group. We did that as part of the setting out the strategy initially, but also just really helping make sure that there's some progress and some thinking to support this work and feedback in. Main feature of that is really trying to sort of get underneath what are the next steps around how we take forward those bold ambitions. And we've seen some of that happening already. So really connecting into the early years work and children, young people, and really making the best use of the Children and Young People's Conference that happened earlier this year. Oliver, you presented at that, or you opened it. I can't remember which one it was. You were a little bit late, I think, to that one. But nonetheless, it was a fantastic event attended by about 200 folks from all different sectors, many from our voluntary community and faith sector as well. And also it brought together some of the some of the essence that we're trying to really bring to life, which is how we get a real focus on our early years, which really ties into our bold ambition, but also how we're working with many different partners, including nationally as well. So Bernardo's, we're doing some fantastic work with Bernardo's and the Health Equity Institute as well. So you saw all of that at that session. In terms of the ICP group, and we'll have a discussion at the development session that we've got later on today, just thinking through how we start to really galvanise the support and the capacity around those 4 bold ambitions. So we recognise that in order to be able to do the things that we think we can add value collectively together, we need to think about how we marshal our resources around that. So I'll give you a latest update on where the operational groups got to on the thinking with that. In terms of the agenda for today, we've got colleagues joining us. So we said that we would have a bit of a deep dive on some of the key aspects of our strategy. So I'm really pleased to say that we've got colleagues from our creative art sector, so they'll be able to really bring to life that connection between actually what we do in our daily lives and those things that enrich us and how they impact on health and well-being. So I think it'd be a really great session to see. So I think Lucy and Julie are going to take us through that. And one of the things that runs through all of our strategies and all of our plans is how we really want to work well with our voluntary sector. Not just in recognising this massive contribution that they make to enabling us to deliver care and support really well for our communities, but actually really the things that we are doing to make sure that we see them as an equal partner in that space as well. So we've got Shafiq joining us this morning and Karen to just give us a sense of where we've got to with that in South Yorkshire. But also what we can do as an integrated care partnership to really support that work, because there is an essence of how we really sort of build on the work that we've already been doing as an integrated care system and really make sure that we can bring to life the vision and the ambition that we've got for our voluntary sector. So I think that was all I wanted to say by way of the paper. I have taken the paper as read, but very happy to take any questions. But I think there's more about getting into the items this morning. Oliver.
Well, thanks. Can I take any comments or questions, please? Brilliant. Okay, thank you. In which case, can we move on to item number 6, please? Creativity, Health and Wellbeing from Lucy Robertshaw and Julie Tolhurst. So we're a bit ahead of schedule, but we've got approximately 25 minutes for this item, including questions. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Really lovely to see so many people, and it's really nice to see some familiar faces around the room as well. My name's Lucy Robertshaw. I am the Director of Arts and Health at Darts. We're a participatory arts charity in Doncaster, rooted in Doncaster. Been working there for the last 30 years, and we are one of the largest participatory arts companies in the country. Today, Julie and I will be presenting for the full 20 minutes, although we've got an extra 5 minutes, there'll be time for some questions. But then we're going to follow up any kind of questions, any kind of actions in the 30-minute workshop that we've got with you afterwards. That's okay. All the photos that you're going to see today, by the way, are taken from work that's happening either at Darts or in Barnsley and other arts organisations, and with full permission of people that have been photographed. But the integrated care strategy vision is that everyone in the diverse communities live a happier, healthier life for longer. We want to work with people with greatest need, and we want to build strong and vibrant communities. Now, the creative and cultural partners in the room today share that vision. We have years of experience, skills, and connections to achieve this using the arts. Across South Yorkshire, there is an absolutely skilled workshop of experienced culture, arts and heritage practitioners who are delivering on creative health programmes. We'll just hold the slide there if that's okay. We've got strong connections to our local areas. We practice strength-based approaches when working with communities. And we run inclusive creative workshops where language, age or disability are not barriers. And there is evidence, really clear evidence, particularly through Daisy Fancourt's work, that the arts can directly address health inequalities, which is obviously something that is absolutely vital. Not only is there national and international research on the arts, so if you have a particular area that you are particularly interested in, I can probably find you a very up-to-date paper, probably in the last 2 to 3 years. We draw quite a lot of our research from the APPG Creative Health Report, which has over 1,000 reports from academic researchers, health professionals across the full life course. So right the way from kind of prenatal, right the way through to end of life. So if you want a paper about any particular area, give me a shout. But we also have academic research on creative health programmes running right now in South Yorkshire, which is quite unusual, particularly within Doncaster. There is a huge body of evidence there that's been completed in the last 2 to 3 years around the impact that we've had with adults living with dementia and their carers, adults experiencing mental health issues, and a very large piece of work with the University of Leeds around dance for over 50s. Some really interesting bits of research coming out of that. So the aim of the presentation today is for the board to recognise the value of the creative health work and also how it can help deliver some of the bold ambitions within the integrated care strategy. And in the workshop, just to start exploring with us a little bit about how we work towards the goal of developing sustainably funded models which are embedded in care pathways. So we've got some really good examples of that. In the last month, we've had funding to work with the breathing pattern disorder patients as part of the hospital work with the pulmonary research team. So there's lots of very clear, up-to-date work either happening, but a much larger potential for more work to be happening across South Yorkshire. So to illustrate this, I've just chosen 2 creative health programmes. Like I said, we have many, many more, but there's more in the briefing paper that you've had. And then in December, you were also sent a really nice document, which was called Improving Health Outcomes Through Culture, Arts and Health. So that gives you more backup, more case studies. So have the next slide, please. The first bold ambition I want to look at is focusing on development in early years so that every child in South Yorkshire is school ready. I'm going to talk about our Tuneful Chatter programme, which is running in Doncaster by Darts. It's a 3-year project led by a consortium. So we have Darts, Cast Theatre and Doncaster Council's Early Years Intervention and Prevention team. And Sheffield Hallam University is our research partner. So again, we're researching. Next slide, please. So Tuneful Chatter was developed in response to the impact of COVID-19 pandemic, specifically on 0 to 5-year-olds. As everyone will know, for both the children and parents, lockdown, a loss of relationships with friends, trusted adults, and definitely routines. There was a mixture of fear, uncertainty, leading to increasing parental mental health problems, and also children actually absorbing that stress from the adults around them. Next slide, please. So now back in education, professionals told us that their younger pupils are struggling. They don't know how to listen, to sit, to concentrate, to take turns, and really important, to interact with adults and each others. And many don't have the words to express how they are feeling or the life experiences to use their imagination. Next slide, please. So Tuneful Chatter uses music, drama, storytelling, dance, and movement to lead playful sessions. All of our sessions are designed to improve communication and language skills alongside children's personal, social, and emotional development. They are working across Doncaster in socioeconomically deprived areas. We're working in 4 family hubs, 4 nurseries, and 4 schools. And we also run work in our town centre cultural venues. We can have the next slide, please. So these include Cast's Hello Baby sessions for babies under 18 months and their parents, allowing the parents the time for high quality play-based interaction with their child and to meet other parents. And I think this one is one that I ran, which was actually using Makaton to encourage communication with very young children. Can I have the next one, please? So I think when we talk about children being school ready, we in the early years development specialists that we work with, we know that this isn't about catching up. There's so much talk about, we must catch up, we must get back to where we are. But really, we need to think about what that child needs right now. and every child is going to be very different. We know that they need the ability to nurture emotional relationships, not just with their parents, but with other adults. We know that they need to feel empathy for others, to be able to communicate in whatever way works with them. So a lot of our work is with children who are non-verbal or have additional needs, which means that speech is not coming as quickly as it would normally do. And they need trusted relationships around them. We really carefully design each of the creative sessions to develop these skills in our Tuneful Chatter sessions. We'll have the last slide from the early years work, please. So just a quote here from one nursery manager and what they told us. They said, "We've noticed a huge change in one child. He's hearing impaired and has some additional needs. In the first session, he was quite withdrawn. He stayed by the side of our staff member the whole time, clutching their hand and needing lots of encouragement to join in. Second time, he was straight in, joining in, laughing, having the time of his life. It was heartwarming to see. He has also become more vocal, which is fantastic. And one of our artists, DL, she came back from a session 2 days ago, and there'd been a child in there who hadn't spoken at all since they'd been in from September, and was so engrossed with this tale that they were telling about hiding and going into a cave, they just started talking. And Jill didn't know that, and they were just having an enormously long conversation because the pressure had been lifted, the focus on something else. So it's yeah, some nice work happening. So the second one, if I could, the next slide, please. The session I'd like to look at in terms of bold ambition is about how we act differently to strengthen and accelerate our focus on prevention and early identification. So this is a project run by Creative Recovery, who are in Barnsley. They ran Things to Live For, which was a project in response to Public Health's call for fresh innovations to support suicide prevention and self-harm in Barnsley. They ran and they still run 7-week courses with the aim of using art to support people to shift the focus towards some of the more positive aspects of life and develop creative ways of coping in very difficult times. They worked with participants from high risk of suicide groups, such as adult males, people affected by substance misuse, people whose relationships have broken down, and also people with long-term physical conditions and people dealing with chronic pain. Next slide, please. So the courses cover a range of art forms from visual arts, writing for well-being, mindful movement, and music. The course helps build a toolkit of strategies, as well as the chance to ignite interest in new things and new connections with others. And I do think that's where the arts are really key. It's not just about that one particular course. It's about what's next. Where is that excitement? Where is those connections being made? What can that person then go and do, either creatively or within voluntary and community sector, whether that be going into, starting to think a little bit about getting back into work. It's just, for most people that we work with, it's just a starting point. Next slide, please. So 100% of attendees stated that since doing the course, they felt more optimistic about the future. 83% said they'd been thinking more clearly since attending, and 100% said they were more able to cope since attending. And again, I'm just going to finish off with another case study. If we could have the next slide, please. So this is a case study. So Nina is a student nurse who'd experienced a huge brain aneurysm whilst resuscitating somebody in A&E. The patient she was resuscitated later died, and Nina was lucky to survive. We met her following invasive surgery when she was struggling with brain damage, fatigue, and other functional disabilities. She was grieving the loss of her career she so loved and was struggling to meet the needs of her family. She was also suffering from PTSD and processing the fact that she may have to live with chronic symptoms for the rest of her life. The group gave her a chance to talk through and also to process the trauma. She also took great self-esteem from realizing the gift she had for drawing in childhood was still there, and she reconnected with her children, doing artwork with them at home. She told us that attending the sessions not only helped with stress release, but also helped her brain heal after surgery by having simple and enjoyable tasks to do at home. When I last spoke to Nina, she was talking to college with a view to returning to her placement and her studies. And I think also what we found when working with kind of NHS colleagues and health colleagues is actually the impact that can have on NHS staff themselves in terms of, co-designing programs with us, taking part in programs, you know, all of our, yeah, lots of things there. So just 3 more slides. Can I have the next one, please? And then I'll hand over to Julie. So I've seen firsthand how creative activity can lead to happier and healthier lives from when we're born, and then as we grow, we work, we live, and we age, as well as how arts engagement can kind of lessen the impact of health inequalities at each of those different stages. Next slide, please. We know that in both the creative and cultural and health sector, we know there's limited resources. We're under no illusion that there's a magic pot of money somewhere. And we also know that there's increasing demand because we are seeing it on the ground as well. But we have a massive opportunity here to join forces and develop collaborative creative health models to reach those that need it most, and to think about new commissioning models that could make the work happen. Last slide, please. So in South Yorkshire, we have a range of small to large scale culture, arts and heritage companies and facilitators who have trusted relationships with communities that have been sustained over months, sometimes years. We work across the life course from birth to death, and we work across geographical communities. So that we're very expert in doing quite targeted work. And my last quote is, I'd just like to finish the presentation with an extract from a letter that we got sent from a 72-year-old woman who comes to our dance-on sessions in Doncaster that we got last month. She said, if I knew somebody was thinking about creative activity and had never done it before, what would she say? She said, don't give up as I nearly did. Seek out activities that are out there. Medication plays a part in recovering from mental health, but along with creative activity, you can have it all. If I could get across how near I was to ending my life and how I feel now, I would shout it from the rooftops. And that's not unusual. We get letters like that, or people talking to us in sessions every week. Yes, hopefully I've kind of given you a bit of a snapshot tour there of creative health programs. Obviously, there are absolutely masses. And if you want to know any more about any of these specific programs, then please feel free to email me. And now I'd like to hand over to Julie from Public Health.
Thanks very much, Lucy. Well, my name's Julie Tolhurst. I'm Public Health Principal in Growth and Sustainability at Barnsley Council. And I've got a few slides to start with where I'll be outlining how creative health contributes to public health outcomes. And longer term is really thinking about how we can ensure that public health and creative health are aligned, complementary and mutually beneficial. And then I'll talk a little bit at the end about some examples of creative health commissioning models to help to introduce some discussion points for later on. So first slide, lovely, thank you. The key public health outcomes really are similar across South Yorkshire, and I've provided examples here of what we're doing in Barnsley, but there is a wealth of experience across South Yorkshire, as I'm sure you'll be aware of, around the collaborative work with the creative industry and with the community voluntary sector that helps to address public health objectives and enhance quality of life and address healthy life expectancy. So creative health is a key ingredient for tackling health inequalities. So we want to support those in greatest need and build strong, vibrant communities. By offering creative opportunities means that we can engage with excluded and marginalised communities in meaningful ways to help to improve health and well-being. So in Barnsley, we've recently launched our Barnsley Place Partnership Health Inequalities Plan. And this recognises the importance of creative health through a range of methods and initiatives, including social prescribing. Being involved in creative opportunities does help us to address some of the wider determinants of health, and that's a key focus for my work, working in growth and sustainability across the distributed model of public health that we have in Barnsley. And a really good example of that is with adult skills and community learning pathways, because we have a whole range of methods and opportunities there around enhancing well-being for participants. And then our Director of Public Health report in 2021 focused specifically around children and young people. You may have heard a bit about that previously. And there, the young people produced a whole range of creative artwork which expressed what matters to me now to help to inform actions to make a difference in their lives. Next slide, please. So Lucy's referred to some of the case studies that address prevention and early intervention. This is one of our key public health priorities, working with partners who share the same aspirations. So from a primary prevention perspective, creative health is an important strategy to improve and promote positive wellbeing and prevent the onset of ill health. So in Barnsley, our public health teams have led a collaborative approach with partners to develop a plan on a page with a vision to live a fuller, healthier life through creativity. And I'm happy to share that plan on a page later on with the partnership. Some of our key objectives include community-led approaches, commissioning sustainable creative health programmes, workforce development, and effective health and cultural partnerships. Our cultural visitor economy team are leading the development of a cultural strategy. And so that has a strong focus on creative health as a way of offering prevention and early intervention activity. I'll just carry on. Well,
It might be desperate to hear about the arts.
So yes, engaging children and young people in creative ways is a focus for our children and young people's plan, as you can see from the slide. And that addresses emotional, mental health, healthy weight, physical activity and social connections. And then through our Dementia and Me partnership, we've joined up our activity and our communication plan to ensure creative activities embedded within programmes working with people living with dementia and their carers.
Yeah.
I just carried on there, so
You did well. Very good.
some of those key points. Okay. On to the next slide, please, around support and recovery. I focused on mental and emotional health here as a key public health priority, working with our stakeholders. Through the development of our mental health, learning disability and autism strategy, we've factored in creativity into the action plans, and Lucy alluded to one of the really excellent examples of how the work is helping to support people who have gone through sort of really traumatic experiences. And the provision has been commissioned via a range of community voluntary sector organisations. And I just wanted to refer of minds. I'm sure you've heard a lot about this. This is hosted by Swift, our mental health charity that does cover the Barnsley area as well, in West Yorkshire as well. And that integrates creativity and the arts into mainstream health and wellbeing practice, both in acute and community settings. And it's a really good example of how that can affect people's lives around support and recovery. On to the next slide, please. Social prescribing. I know we'll be hearing a lot about this later, but I just wanted to mention that in Barnsley, we are strengthening the connections between our main provider of social prescribing, which is Barnsley Healthcare Federation, and our cultural offer, including the development of social prescribing for children and young people, which is an exciting development. And then you'll be aware of the green prescribing scheme across the ICS, which is providing many creative outdoor opportunities as a way of keeping fit and active. Next slide, please. So I'll move on now to some of the commissioning models for consideration today. Firstly, to start with Greater Manchester, a social glue, which is quite a famous report, I think, that you may have seen previously. It's a snapshot in time of the fast-growing field of culture, health and wellbeing, and its place in Greater Manchester's ongoing cultural evolution. So back in November 2022, Greater Manchester ICS Integrated Care launched their creative health strategy, and that details how Greater Manchester wants to become the first city region in the world to realise the power of creativity, culture and heritage in addressing inequity and improving health and wellbeing of its residents. It's really interesting, actually, because it is highlighting the role of creative health in delivering NHS England's priorities, including the core 20+5, and in delivering against the Greater Manchester strategy, helping it to become a greener, fairer and more prosperous city region. So that's certainly one to sort of bear in mind when we're looking at our plans. On to the next slide, please. NHS Gloucestershire. Now, this is a really interesting consortium approach, and it's based on an alliance commissioning model. There are 20 across the country, and Create Gloucestershire is focusing on growing arts and health opportunities for everyone every day in Gloucestershire. Create Health is anchored across a network of place-based networks that ensure the offer is firmly rooted in the needs, aspirations, and assets of people and communities. The approach is about commissioning for outcomes with co-production and learning at the heart. The health utilisation data set is being created, and that's quite an interesting area to look at in terms of what targets and measures we can be starting to look at. And also a commissioning framework has been developed with community voluntary sector with provision of recurrent funding as well. So there's some examples there of some of the clinical outcomes that have been integrated into some of their work, looking at reducing emergency admissions and measuring mental health and wellbeing. And the final slide. This is looking at Calderdale. We're working very closely in Barnsley with Calderdale across to West Yorkshire, and there's some exciting work developing there in terms of looking at a creative health infrastructure across West Yorkshire. So Swift have recently commissioned, that's the right slide, sorry. They've commissioned a 6-month trial of a creative health workforce, working in acute wards, delivering activity, working one-to-one with patients and staff, developing creative care pathways and linking to community activities on discharge. There are around 17 creative practitioners. Now, this is fast moving depending on the type of activity, and that's 8 full-time equivalent posts. And they're in the process of ensuring a diverse offer of creative activity across 15 acute inpatient wards. The aim of this is to reduce incidents on the wards, reduce readmissions and the average length of stay. And there are some exciting emergency plans for Culturedale, which is Year of the Culture, which is planned for next year, with large-scale events, workshops, learning and development. So it'd be really great to sort of have a look at how that's all progressing and have some involvement in that as well. And I think of particular interest today is a new collaborative proposal in West Yorkshire for pioneering creativity and health infrastructure. And they're working closely as a collaborative with the National Centre of Creative Health, the Mayor's Office, the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, West Yorkshire Health and Care Partnership, Arts Council England and other parts across West Yorkshire. So I think, overall that presents us with a really key opportunity to learn from West Yorkshire approach and hopefully look at how we can collaborate across the ICPs. And that's everything from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was very much enjoying Culturedale. We have a little bit of time. I just have a couple of brief things first. One, so I used to work for Book Trust, and we would consider ourselves, they would consider themselves to be making a health intervention around literacy. It's delivered through health visitors. But one of the things we always struggled with was evidence. So I'm just interested in the evidence point about how you go about collecting evidence and what your evidence shows you. And then also just a reflection, because I was in Barnsley for the Commission on the Future of Work on the Workplace. Thank you. And we went to meet some people who were engaged in a cultural activity that were essentially painting T-shirts as a route back into more confidence really, but ideally into then work. And I was really struck by how much they valued that experience and how important it was to them, and how good that was as a project. So I just, just as a reflection really about kind of the value of some of these things, because I've seen it myself both in my professional life and as Mayor. But yeah, just interested in the evidence point, if you might have any reflections.
In terms of the early years work with Tuneful Chatter.
Okay.
In terms of the Tuneful Chatter work, we are 4 months into a 3-year project. So we're working with Lane Burke and Sheffield Hallam University. So we're already starting to pull together the measures by which we will create evidence, but we have just done one, but we're going to do annual conferences. So they will report next year on what we've learned so far in the first year. So I can obviously make sure that everybody's invited to that, or if there's papers that's delivered, we can get those straight out to you.
David Roach from Rotherham. Thank you for a very full, comprehensive presentation. It's very pleasing to see, because I think, well, I hope everybody in this room sees a link between creative arts and public health. So it was really great to see that all those wonderful examples that you brought forward today. I think I was also pleased that you used Rotherham's example of social prescribing. Although, can I say that we sort of feel if there is opportunity to do another example of our greater example of our work relating to public health is our work on the Children's Capital of Culture, which I think would make a very good presentation at some point in the future. And linked to that, so I'll change on to that. We totally support, the links between the health, creativity, etc. And we would totally support the setting up of the recommendation for this cultural group. We would also like to suggest, I say we because Rotherham always has a pre-meeting, and so I'm representing Rotherham views, not just my own. Also on that group, can I suggest that you might want to invite Leanne Buchan, who is the one leading the Children's Capital of Culture, and also a Sheffield-based group, Artworks. Although they're not only in Sheffield, they also have links elsewhere, but they do some fantastic work with people with learning disabilities. We would, however, like to know, not necessarily today, but as you develop the strategy and the group, if it is totally agreed to set up the strategy group, and I hope it is, the links between the relationship between the creative health group, government arrangements at place, including health and wellbeing boards, the cultural partnerships, etc. Will the group report into the ICP? How will they link in with health and wellbeing boards? And what will be picked up at place level and what will be picked up at the ICP? I'm not looking for answers to those points now, but I think when you develop your strategy, we'd be very keen to see you develop that. But say, fantastic piece of work, fantastic start.
Thank you very much. Thank you for those points. And I think it's interesting because I think with Doncaster we've got quite clear, because we lead. So Dr. Rupert Suckling and I, back in 2018, set up the Arts and Health Board, which Rachel sits on as well. And that reports back up into Health and Wellbeing Board. So at certain points we will present to Health and Wellbeing Board, and then it's within the Team Doncaster structure. So I think there's a very clear model that if Sheffield was setting theirs up, that they can kind of then follow. And then it's starting to think about South Yorkshire, because I think that the key challenge is that we're all in very different places in terms of Sheffield, Rotherham, Doncaster, Barnsley. Everyone's got their own strengths, everyone's got their own kind of challenges. So it's how we look at that across South Yorkshire now that we're going to care. I think that's a challenge, but thank you for those points. I've written those individuals down, and Artworks are superb. Yeah.
Just to add that we do have the same arrangement with our Health and Wellbeing Board in Barnsley as well. So I think we've got a couple of examples there about, how we can develop that stakeholder engagement, and sure we have ongoing discussions to look at how we can progress this at pace, really. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Angela Argento from Sheffield City Council. I just wanted to go back on measuring progress, because it's something that we kind of struggle with. Like, we hear kind of across local authorities and NHS obviously is driven by targets and measuring. But I've said this before, sometimes you can't measure in the short term, and that's the problem. The problem in terms of reporting back is because how do you measure the impact on someone's mental health in the short term, when mental health is something that can affect people for a long time? Or my question is, what does being school ready mean? Because if you look at how young children start year school, and you go to any other European country, children start school much later, and also there is a lot more emphasis on playing and art and things. Disclosure, I was a secondary school teacher in this country for 16 years, but I was a qualified primary teacher in Italy before I moved here, and there is a lot more emphasis on play before you get to 6 and then start school. So kids start like a year and a half later, but if you go to North European countries, children start as late as 7. So is it our being school ready actually the wrong measure to use? Because actually children should be playing. They shouldn't be ready to, I remember my son started school of in the January when Sheffield still had a double intake, and he didn't have the fine motor skills to hold the pen, and he used to get in trouble a lot, but he wasn't physically ready. It wasn't that he wasn't ready for school. It was just that that's not what you do at 4.5. Holding a pen is not natural. So it's maybe we need to really rethink how we set these targets, because we just maybe measuring the wrong thing.
Thank you for the presentation. Really enjoyed that. I would support the recommendations. I'm the Chief People Officer at the Integrated Care Board, and I was particularly interested in the workforce example and the case study that you gave. So, I'd be really keen for, if we do support the recommendation, to have a South Yorkshire group to have a workforce angle on that, because I think that could really support our work and health thinking. And I think your case study not only tackles potential retention, but actually bringing people back into the workforce after a traumatic experience. So thank you for that.
I mean, I absolutely loved it, but I think that it's a great example of what we can do as a system, where we can identify really good practice happening across the region, but start to look at how we can develop that strategically and collaboratively. So I really welcome the idea that actually we could develop a strategy for this area of work together that is practice led, because it's all about the practice. I think that practice, that strategy would then look at how can we embed this in a more rooted way across the system. And for me, I'm interested not just in the work that cultural organisations are doing in this space, but also what our health and care settings are doing in this space, and how we can find how we can look at workforce development so that all of our workforce feel comfortable in using the tools of creativity, culture, because they are many. But it's reading, it's listening to music, it's having a little dance. It doesn't necessarily have to be a specialist skill in some ways. So how do we get the workforce really comfortable with creating more creative environments and using those tools in their work? I think there's some really interesting things about measuring what matters. I've always been of the view that being school ready is an institutional view, but actually being ready to learn is actually, and ready to play is much more important. So let's think about in this work how we really measure what matters, which is the impact on people's lives, on quality of life, and actually, health and happiness, which are the core of our vision going forward. So completely, we'll do anything, I think, as a system to try and make sure that this is more embedded. I'm so happy to support in whatever way we can.
Thank you.
Thanks. Oliver's gone, so I'm sharing it. Sorry. Can I get Alex? And then can you just finish off? Because obviously we're having a session later on this. So I want to, Alex, thank you.
So I'm Alexis Chappell, Strategic Director for Adult Care and Wellbeing in Sheffield City Council. Just want to say three things. First of all, I think it's a really great presentation, and I think it really has a great opportunity for absolutely, developing across South Yorkshire and beyond. Two thoughts around it. Support the recommendations, but I would suggest that the South Yorkshire group is called Health and Wellbeing. So it really focuses not just on health outcomes, it's actually about the wider wellbeing outcomes that we're trying to achieve. Secondly, I would like to look at how this connects into the wider place-based prevention strategies, because there'll be a place-based prevention strategy across not only in health and wellbeing boards, but also in each of the different kind of areas. So it's how that connects across, and that probably links with some of the mapping exercises that we've talked about in the ICP operational group. So probably an opportunity here to connect that across. And then the third thing is I actually chair a Yorkshire and Humber Ageing and Living Well collaborative, and it's made up of colleagues right across social care, public health, leisure, and voluntary sector and VCF, and people with lived experiences. And what I'm going to do is actually invite you to come along to that, because I think it'd be a really good connecting across actually the wider kind of networks as well. And particularly in our Living and Aging Well network, we're really focusing on actually exactly everything you're talking about, is the prevention aspect, and also how we connect wider to other areas of activity. My final bit I'm going to say is, I think my suggestion is linking into co-production, because for me, to take this forward on a South Yorkshire basis is about, and I'm thinking Helen's probably going to back me up in this one, is for me, my big thing is about how we really co-produce this with people with lived experience and also unpaid carers and family members, so that their experiences and views really further develop this. So it's not officer-led as such, it's very much people-led. Yeah.
Thanks, Alexis. Lucy, do you want to? I think we should finish here, because I know we're having a conversation. Is there anything you want to just finish off on before we move on? Can I say, I think everyone found that incredibly stimulating, and the impact across a wide age range and group that we're looking to support was genuinely really impressive. So thank you very much for that. Okay, next agenda item 7, a voluntary community social enterprise. Shafiq, Karen, good to see you. Shafiq, how are you? Can I lead into you and hand over to you, Shafiq?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm here with Karen today to talk about our developing voluntary community sector alliance across South Yorkshire. I'm going to set the I'm the Chief Executive of Voluntary Action Rotherham, an umbrella organisation. I'm also a steering group member of our voluntary sector alliance, which works across South Yorkshire and a bit of Bassett law. I'm going to set a bit of context in terms of the sector as a whole, and explain the breadth and diversity, and try and link that in with some of the bold ambitions to show relevance. And then I'm going to hand over to Karen to talk about the work we've done so far in developing the actual alliance. So first slide, please. So in terms of the our area, South Yorkshire, research shows that there's well over 6,500 voluntary community sector organisations, registered and unregistered. The sector is very diverse. The breadth and diversity of the sector is one of its strengths. We've got many grassroots community groups providing a range of support services, from mother and toddler groups to walking groups to arts groups, to community connection groups. You name it, there's a voluntary community sector neighbourhood group which provides support to local residents. There are voluntary organisations, there are faith groups, there are registered charities. So in terms of the diversity of the sector, it's very rich. What the research shows is that well over a third of those groups work in local neighbourhoods. Nearly a third of them work across the whole local authority patch, and nearly a third of them work on a much wider area. Nearly a third of those organisations, 29% of them, say that actually they contribute towards health and well-being. Next slide, please. So I'm trying to follow Lucy in terms of the breadth and diversity, and it's very difficult. Those 6,500 plus organisations, all of them actually produce outcomes and support to those residents, and their service users. But so all I'm able to do today is give you a bit of a snapshot of some breadth and range of work. So in terms of the bold ambition on focus on developing early years and supporting every child to be school ready, whatever our view may be about being school ready, we know that nearly half of the voluntary community sector organisations work with children and young people. A couple of examples: in Rotherham, we have the Children, Young People and Families Consortium. They support over 45,000 children and young people in Rotherham, with approximately 14,000 families. Two projects to touch on at the moment. The consortium are working on the Smiles for Miles programme, which is social, emotional, mental health, working with a range of partners, and that's delivered over 2,500 activities to well over 1,800 children and young people over an 18-month period. In Barnsley, we have the Station House Community Association Playgroup that provides opportunities for children aged over 2, and there are key qualified workers to ensure that actually those children and those babies reach their potential. Next slide, please. Bold ambition in relation to prevention and early intervention. We know that the VCSE organisations have those trusted connections and access to assets and are aware of the vulnerabilities in their local communities, and what they deliver in terms of health determinants and building resilience again is quite key. We know from some of the research that 14% of them improve access to basic services, nearly a third give people confidence, 18% support physical activity, and nearly a third reduce social isolation. A couple of examples, we have the Barnsley Older People's Physical Activity Alliance, and that's the NHS, private sector, voluntary sector organisations offering physical activities for people over 50. In Sheffield, we have the People Keeping Well programme, which is connecting people, improving people's health and well-being, underpinned by social prescribing. Local anchor organisations have come together with other partners, working with primary care networks, a team of coaches, securing awards and arrears for people, working with wellbeing coaches who run a number of social cafes, menopause cafes, exercise, gym sessions, and run a successful community grants programme. Somebody said to me during COVID, can I give them a list of the organisations in Rotherham that provide support to people around mental health? And I can share this with you because you're a relatively new audience, so you won't be bored by my example. And I said, well, what do you mean in terms of mental health? Do you mean that the voluntary community organisation have got mental health in their service spec? Well, there's very few. The reality is that most voluntary community sector organisations, if not all, support people's mental health. So what matters to people, it might be the art group, it might be the walking group, it might well be the CAB, it may be the domestic abuse service, but actually there's everything that the VCS organisations do supports people's well-being. So and that's not rocket science. We don't need mental health in the title to describe that. Next slide, please. Our bold ambition in terms of increasing economic participation and a fair and inclusive and sustainable economy. Well, the voluntary community sector across South Yorkshire is a major contributor to our economy. It is a trusted gateway, often a path to employment and skills. It promotes social inclusion, and it supports and advocates for a better, more sustainable environment. Our estimate is that the economic value of the sector is nearly £700 million, with an estimated value of 2.4 billion when you consider the added and social value. 13% of on-sector organisations support employability through skills development and volunteering. 13% of them support unemployed and workless individuals. 24% of them support community cohesion. And I'm not going to go through all the stats. We will share the slides. On the right hand side, you've got some examples of work right across South Yorkshire in terms of from the Doncaster Digital Inclusion Programme to the refurbishment programme, which is recycling and taking on work placements. In Sheffield, you've got the Reach Up Youth Programme, which is a leadership programme working with young men and securing level 2 qualification and employment. And then you've got Sheffield Rotherham Wildlife Trust working on nature recovery networks and green social prescribing. And what I'm struck by is that actually in terms of when we're talking about economic participation, for everybody the route is different, and very often in terms of where volunteering and engaging with VCSE organisations, it's really important that actually those pathways exist for people, because not everybody is work ready or training ready, and there's hundreds of examples that we're aware of that actually people have used volunteering to go on to employment and gain incredible skills to be able to be able to work in a paid setting. Next slide, please. our fourth bold ambition in terms of people, in terms of collaboration, uh, across health and social care, the VCSC carers, paid and unpaid. We know that there's 16,000 employees across South Yorkshire where the VCS are concerned, with well over 63,000 regular volunteers, and collectively they produce 4.5 million hours of value-added work, which is estimated between 45 and 63 million. A good many of those VCSE organisations support carers, and there's strong diversity in terms of BME organisations, disabled people, and women and graduates, in terms of not just in the leadership of VCSE organisations, but in terms of their delivery. And a couple of examples on the right-hand side: Crossroads Care supported nearly 1,200 carers and provided nearly 70,000 care hours in Rotherham last year. And we know that the volunteer centres right across our sub-region support placements, and I've just mentioned to you in terms of how important it is that actually that volunteer centres exist to be able to support and link people into those opportunities. So I can't do the breadth and brilliant presentation that my colleagues did before in terms of some of the visuals, because I suppose developing the alliance seems a bit dry. But I'm going to hand over to you, Karen, in terms of describing our journey so far.
Thank you, Shafiq, and hello everyone. I'm Karen Smith. I work for NHS South Yorkshire ICB as the VCSE Programme Director. Next slide, please, Max. So I'm just going to describe a little bit of the work that we're doing to develop our voluntary sector alliance. So where we are is that we have an alliance which I would describe really as a South Yorkshire-wide network of voluntary organisations, forums, networks, and our wider system colleagues and partners. And we're very much aiming to build on and connect with everything that we know is already out there. There's been some mapping of voluntary sector forums and networks at place, and we know that there's hundreds. So we're trying to find a way to connect that up so that the sector can engage in the South Yorkshire-wide work. Our alliance is very much embedded in the ICS governance alongside other alliances and provider collaboratives, and it reports to the System Leadership Executive Group. And it's steered by a group of voluntary sector leaders from our infrastructure organisations. Our infrastructure organisations are our voluntary actions, our CVSs, the organisations whose role is really to be conduit with place, leadership, advocate on behalf of the sector, and an honest broker in this kind of work. It's also chaired by a voluntary sector member, and after a year and a half of fabulous chairing, Shafiq has recently handed over to Helen Sims, who's the Chief Officer of Voluntary Action Sheffield. And I support this work as well. Next slide, please. So I think this was mentioned earlier that we have developed and signed a voluntary sector and integrated care system memorandum of understanding. And I did want to just talk about this a little bit because it's a really important milestone in developing a strong relationship for partnership. And I wanted to just touch on what this contains really. We had a number of conversations with the voluntary sector last year, and it was really important to do that to start to think about and think through what this relationship needs to be. What are we aspiring to do? And the vision that is very much driven by our voluntary sector partners describes a voluntary sector that's involved in every, across the full breadth and potential of its involvement. So really recognising the sector and its value across strategy, delivery, engagement and insight. We have described values, principles and responsibilities of good partnership working. And through those conversations, we surfaced a number of priorities that really mattered to voluntary sector partners. So if we're going to get partnership working in the best possible place, these were the things that the sector told us that we needed to really think about and work on. So thinking about our commissioning work, thinking about how we resource and enable the capacity of the voluntary sector to be involved in system work, thinking through how we strengthen communications and engagement, and then building onto that, how do we work together effectively around community engagement? And how can we invest well? And this has been a theme I think we've been hearing through the morning. So I'll say a bit more on that in a minute. That agreement is signed by the ICB and the voluntary sector at the moment, but actually it was always intended to be an iterative agreement and document, something that we want to keep under continuous review to build on and strengthen in collaboration with wider partners. Next slide, please. So just to say a little bit about what the Alliance has actually been doing so far and some of its successes. Kind of hearing some of the things that really mattered to the voluntary sector. We've carried some of those things through. So we've done a lot of work actually to increase the capacity of the sector to engage in the system. And that's looked like investing in voluntary sector South Yorkshire wide events that's helped the sector kind of be more sighted on the changing landscape of system work, to connect where it feels right to do so and to start to shape the agenda with us. We've also invested in an engagement post, which is hosted in the voluntary sector, working on behalf of the voluntary sector, but to support groups to reach into the system. And we've invested in a participation fund. This was actually a really important principle, that we support financially the involvement of the voluntary sector's capacity to get involved in actually what's a bigger layer of system working across South Yorkshire. And we've invested in research, much of which we've quoted already in this presentation. So we've been relating some of this to our third sector trends research, which was led by Durham University, but actually the voluntary sector's leading more South Yorkshire voluntary sector led research, which is state of the sector, and we'll be hearing more about that in the coming months. We've been working together on new collaborative opportunities, and there's a couple of examples here, and actually I was really happy to hear about the example around green social prescribing given earlier, so I won't talk too much about that, but I would like to note that the voluntary sector has been a really key partner in green social prescribing, which is all about increasing access to green space and nature-based activities for mental health. And actually we have been evaluating that. We have been building an evidence base, working in collaboration with a consortium of universities from across the country. So there is some really good evidence that shows the impact on mental health. The Age UKs across South Yorkshire worked together to collaborate around an anticipatory care pilot to find new ways to support people with long-term conditions. And we worked together to find a way to invest in place-based led health inequalities projects. And an example that I wanted to just share quickly is Sheffield Mind. This is us, mental health project, where kind of linking back to all of the work that Lucy described earlier, actually Sheffield Mind was able to engage people from diverse communities in conversations about their mental health and their experiences of mental health services through art sessions. And they showcased and exhibited some of that art, which was absolutely fantastic, in the Central Library in Sheffield recently. We've done lots of work to shape decisions together. There's been some really important appointments across the system that bring voluntary sector leadership and involvement to all of these kinds of conversations. And we're really underway now with a programme of work to appoint voluntary sector organisations to our system delivery groups, our provider collaboratives and our alliances. And we've been working to shape strategies together. So I think it's understood that the voluntary sector's had substantial involvement in shaping the integrated care strategy. And the priorities that are noted in the MOU, we've carried through and made a commitment to taking those forward in our joint forward plan. Next slide, please. So just to say a little bit more about our priorities. They're embedded in our MOU, very much reflected in the ICP strategy and joint forward plan. And we're now working together to kind of describe a fuller strategy that really talks about some of this work and takes it broader, so that we're looking at the full breadth and potential of opportunities to work together. So we're working to kind of describe in more depth our enabling priorities, which I would say are kind of continuing to iterate our model. It's very much developing, but actually there's more to do to really engage and connect well across South Yorkshire with all key partners. We are doing lots of work to fully embed the sector as a kind of a business as usual approach really in the system. So in our boards, our strategies, and thinking about how we resource that capacity. And we're doing a lot to think about how we maximise investment opportunities in the sector. There's a lot of conversation underway to think about how we get really good principles for voluntary sector investment, how we can kind of develop new models that are more creative, more based in the principles of co-design. And actually to think about how do we lever in external resources into South Yorkshire Buy, and thinking through our respective roles as good partners in that kind of work to enable a thriving voluntary sector. And we're thinking through how we strengthen partnership work in terms of community engagement, working through the voluntary sector to engage with people with lived experience, and actually thinking about how we capture some of the insights that the voluntary sector brings to some of these conversations. Doing lots of work with Barbara Coyle actually around that to look at how we bring some parity of esteem to that work. And we're also thinking about what can we actually do together, which you know, is obviously really important. So we've heard a lot about social prescribing, and that's an area of significant strength for the voluntary sector. We want to continue to expand and strengthen that. And there's some exciting pilots in secondary care, for instance, which take it into new areas. We also are doing a lot of work to think about how we strengthen volunteering across the system. The voluntary sector really brings so much expertise to this. And we're thinking through how we increase diversity in volunteering capacity. The well-being of our volunteers is important, and how we strengthen some of those pathways through to employment and careers. And then we're really looking at kind of everything, really. The voluntary sector is a thread that runs through all that we're doing. We're looking at the opportunities to work together to deliver in new and different ways. I think the bold ambitions is such an important part of that. How can we work together to really maximise the impact across those bold ambitions and across all of our strategies? So we're really thinking through some of those opportunities right now. Next slide, please, Mags. So we wanted to leave this presentation on a discussion point, really, if we have a few minutes to, okay. So we were kind of keen to ask you all, what do you see as the opportunities and priorities in working together? Thank you.
Karen, Shafiq, that was great. By the way, Shafiq, I'm gutted you didn't tell them you were a member of the ICB, which has destroyed my ego, but never mind. You should know you never require my position. You've never sought it before on anything. Any points to raise? Helen.
Thank you. Just to clarify, I actually have been involved in this work. So I'm Helen Steers from Voluntary Action Sheffield. I just really welcome this discussion now. I think it's really important that we engage with the work that's been done, and I think there's a massive opportunity. In terms of the opportunities and priorities, it's been covered, but I think just being more explicit about the fact that the VCS has got the reach to be able to do things that we can't do without the kind of relationships, but also I think they've got a really key role in the critical thinking and problem solving, and I think that's the same for the creative discussion. We're actually much stronger if we bring all that insight together, because we've done some great stuff. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Helen. I agree with that. I think the different view they bring to the table is really, really important, and one that the statutory agencies often don't get. And I think that's really important.
I mean, I think the opportunity is to genuinely make this sector an equitable partner. But I think we can't underestimate the scale of that challenge when you look at the number of organisations you're talking about. So I think we need to look very carefully at how are the structures in place and the infrastructure in place to make sure that those organisations feel connected with the health and care partners here. At a delivery level, I think there's three things we need to look at. What's the capacity of because beyond commissioning, because I think commissioning is only the tip of the iceberg of what's possible. I think we need to look at co-production and really how that sector is equipped to engage in co-production. I think we need to look at evaluation, different types of evaluation, particularly if you look at some of these organisations are micro, so they won't have a dedicated evaluation officer, but how can they still undergo? So I think we can look at new models of evaluation. And the third thing I think that I've written down, and I can't even read my own writing, it's about connection. It's about how do we make sure that we have the right points of connection between the voluntary community sector and the system. And that's partly because that social prescribing is a very straightforward conduit and connection, you know, that enables the voluntary and community sector to be involved in this work. can we find other conduits and connections and other models of doing that? For example, you know, connecting into housing, connecting into the green prescribing, so that we're not lodged into social prescribing as being the only model.
So David Crichton, Chief Medical Officer at the Integrated Care Board. So I've got exec responsibility for population health management, and I think we're only going to be successful if we have a strong VCSE community. I've also got exec responsibility for research and innovation, and one of our commitments is to allow all of our public to have the opportunity to be involved in research. And you may have seen some recent blogs and things about Our Future Health, and that's a good example where actually that research may allow us to come up with the innovations that will be our solutions for years to come. But if it's just people like me that sign up to it, that's not going to give us the answers we need. So finally, we should do it because it's the right thing to do. But actually, more and more, most of the funding opportunities that are open to us within the NHS are to have a strong foundation and relationship with our VCSE. Thank you.
Thank you. So Stephen Pleasant from the MCA. So, I mean, the comment is we've just seen two brilliant presentations, haven't we? But really get to the heart of the fact of the criticality of those sectors in terms of delivering against the strategy. That's it. And anybody could not leave this room without the absolutely clear understanding. But actually, unless we do more in these spaces, we ain't going to deliver against the things that we've talked about previously. So my point around priorities is what we've seen in terms of this, the work that Karen and Rafik have led on, is it's an enormously brilliant piece of work, actually, but it's been led through the ICB. And I absolutely have no doubt that one of the things we need to do is deepen that work and in all the ways and all the guises that we've seen in terms of the presentation. And I include that in terms of the creative work as well. But then there is a broader point, and I think Kathy might have just alluded to it, was, is there something here about not just deepening the work in terms of the set of principles that exist within, for example, the MOU, but broadening this out to a wider public service conversation that doesn't just start with the leadership the ICB's provided, but actually starts to move to a much broader public sector MOU with the voluntary and community sector. So, and that's a question, by the way, not a statement, actually, but I'd be interested in your views on it.
Do you want to come back?
We'd very much welcome that, Stephen. I think from the comments I've heard, I think there is a risk that we can overcomplicate this, because from my perspective, some of this is common sense. I think generally public sector partners and the state at large seems to be risk averse. I do hear people talking about research and innovation. And I'm really sorry to say this, but from my perspective, it's not rocket science. It's really common sense. If you listen to people about what matters to them, and they tell you if it's about their housing or heating and unemployment and paying the gas bill and the poor housing and not having a job and not knowing, you know, how to all the things that are, you know, relatively easy to understand but difficult to tackle, VCSE organisations support and deliver those. I just want to end on that. Actually, there's a risk that in terms of where we talk about health inequalities and we talk about the left shift, and I know it's really tough ask, but what I would say is collectively we've got to, yes, there are many things the VCSE can bring to the table in terms of investment and different approaches, but absolutely in terms of our collective pound, we've got to look at that differently and invest that differently. So that would be my ask.
Really helpful, Shafiq. Thank you very much. I think really strong commitment here, Shafiq. But I actually think Stephen's point's a really important one. This is work that we've done at the ICB, which is great, but this should be way beyond that in a wider public sector. And maybe that's something we can pick up outside. I will now return the chairmanship to you.
The good news is Treasury are going to give us loads of money. So it's all sorted. It's fixed. So that's good news. Okay.
By the way, the timing went awry when you left.
I did. Okay. It's good to know, actually. Thank you for that. Okay, I believe we're on item 8. Is that Bloomberg Harvard?
It is.
Andy, thank you.
Morning, everyone. Thanks, Chair. Just a really quick verbal update. Apologies, there's no paper. That's not to belie the fact that there's progress. As partnership will remember, we've agreed to establish a Safer Spaces Sleep programme based on the simple fact that there are too many young people in South Yorkshire who do not have a safe space to sleep, however that is defined. And that is not just beds and good sheets, that's good quality housing, and all of the things around that. So as many of you will remember, we've chosen Safe Space to Sleep as a sort of generative early intervention that we wanted to try and get things moving on. We, through feedback from partners, stakeholders who actually have to deliver this stuff, is that we can't impose a program on top of places. So we are not imposing a program on top of places. We are adopting a pilot model in 4 places across South Yorkshire. We're just nailing down Sheffield. Emma Latimer, exec place director in Sheffield's been really helpful in just sorting that. But we're going to be working in Goldthorpe, Barnsley, Mexborough, Doncaster, and Swinton in Rotherham. Sheffield's just to be confirmed. Each of those pilot areas will look different, deliberately so, because the problems and causes of poor safe space to sleep outcomes data will be different in each and every one of those places. So the solutions will have to look different. So those places, we've brought all of the areas together, and some potential partners within that. Family hubs play a key part of it. We have to do this with our family hubs. So we're just now at the stage where those sort of pilot areas are starting to mobilise. And we're just working through some of the wraparound support we need to put in place for that, around data, around some project management, around the evaluation. So we learn properly. It's really interesting, Kathy, in terms of if there are different ways for us to evaluate, that'd be really helpful. So that the work is moving. Let's face it, it's we're not going to shift this one quickly, but with the pilot areas, the learning, we will then do what we said right at the start of all this, which is develop a sort of a business case based around some of the things we know that works. We might do that enables us to build a bigger investable proposition further down the track. So I don't know, Will is part of the group as well, but there are colleagues who've contributed to engage to that. So, but I'll stop talking.
Will, did you want to add?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. That's really helpful update. I think only in terms of just building on what Andy said there, so connecting this back to our bold ambition. So this hasn't come from anywhere other than our work around thinking what can we do collectively together across South Yorkshire to add value to what's already happening. And just to remind folks, and there are some new people here, through the Mayor's support, we had the opportunity to have some, really helpful input to help us think about what we can do differently to really change the dial on doing something around health inequalities. And it was your big challenge, Oliver, to this group. So what are you going to do different then? Because actually that's a problem that's been around a long time. And through the support and a cross-sector group, of which I was one of those, with different perspectives and from our 4 places, we landed on children and young people, but particularly early years, not least, because Andy will have gone through this at the last meeting a couple of months ago, because actually if we start there, we can really add value, because if you do something at that point, that is life-changing for young people and young adults and older adults in terms of the impact that it has on those things that really matter to people, but actually some of those big ambitions that we've got as well, particularly healthy life expectancy. But the only thing I wanted to come in for, sorry for that long introduction, was when we were listening to our creativity and health folks, you'll have heard it a number of times, trusted relationships. And I wanted to mention that because whilst we're talking about safe space to sleep, and that could be reflected as, quite practically in the sense of some safe space or a practical thing like a bed and or other. Actually, the thinking behind that through the work that we did, and it was quite a focused methodological approach, was how you really get to know who those trusted relationships are with families. And that is the real reason why that is one of the entry points, not about a bed. Yes, it's important around safe space to sleep, and sleep is really important for those of you that really know about children and what impacts on their development. Sleep is really up there on the agenda, but also just wanted to reflect the fact we really are getting alongside where this work's already happening, as Andy said. You know, so family hubs development, this is not adding to, it's about how can we really support and enable and add value in that space. And the final thing, and I will shut up, Oliver, because I know that the time's running on, is this connects really well with a bid that South Yorkshire's been successful with recently. So an NHS England bid where we've been given some additional funding to help us in this space. So really looking at what are those really practical interventions that can really support children, young people and families in this space as well. And we'll have all got some access to that support because it was a South Yorkshire proposal, but very much embedded with family hubs. Sorry, long-winded, but I just thought it was just contextual.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions for you, Andy or Will, or comments? No. All right. Brilliant. Thank you. That's great progress. I really appreciate the update. Okay, moving on to the next item, item number 9. Sorry, NHS 5-year joint forward plan for South Yorkshire from Will. Thank you.
Can you? Yeah, sorry, I haven't put my microphone on. And I think we had a fairly good update on the progress of the development of our joint forward plan at the last meeting. I think Mariana delivered that, and there's a very comprehensive paper in the pack. I just want to talk you through a few things as well in terms of what you have got. So you've got a paper, and within it there is a link that I'm hoping you found to the full plan, which is in public. It was discussed at the Integrated Care Board meeting earlier this month, and therefore there's good opportunity to air where the plan is in terms of its development. There is also another link in there as well, which is to the full engagement report. So you can see the full engagement report as well. I will cover a bit of that, but very happy to take any further questions outside the room on that as well, or indeed at any subsequent meetings. But in terms of the joint forward plan, so just a couple of things. So it is a direct response from our perspective intentionally to our integrated care strategy. So I'm saying that, but I think it's for others to judge whether that's the case or not. Within it, you'll see that there are also links to our health and care integrated plans in place. That's really important. It's really important because we've got a strategy which is South Yorkshire. We've got a joint forward plan which is South Yorkshire. But actually, what's really important is how both of those things are being translated by others. So here we are, is the NHS translating our integrated care strategy in terms of what it means to the NHS, but also in the context of how important it is that the NHS works with others. Others across South Yorkshire, others in place, and indeed our communities. So when you're looking at it from what does this mean to our communities in Barnsley or Rotherham or Sheffield, you'll want a number of lenses on that, but you really will want a lens of, so what is our health and care plan in those places looking like, so that we can see the translation of that. And that's important not only because it will give you a sort of a granular sense of what that means to our communities, but it'll start to allow us to say, well, actually, are we making the best use of our relationships and how we work with others? Because one of the asks of us in our joint forward plan is, are we doing that essentially? You know, how we work with other partners for our communities. So I think that's one of the things that we need to do. I think also, if we didn't look at those wider plans, it might leave some questions hanging because you wouldn't be able to see how that's translating. So that I needed to do that preamble. So I think it's really important that this group understood the developments of that plan. It's also been through quite a lot of engagement and involvement. So where we started our involvement with our communities back last year on the integrated care strategy, and we committed to continuing that in the development of our joint forward plan and beyond, we have done that. So you should be able to see that continuation of involvement with our communities. We also ramped it up a bit because we did say that we would try harder to reach those communities that we don't hear from as often. So you'll see in the full report that we've really tried to do that. We worked with Health Watch and the voluntary sector to help us do that over that period. That is continuing. So the draft that you've got is an engagement draft. We're still engaging on it. And the involvement's still continuing. We've also engaged with all of our system partners. So along the development journey, so our health and wellbeing boards, our system leadership executive, our collaboratives and alliances. We've taken that kind of approach in its development as well. And I think the final thing to say on that, and we will take the joint forward plan to our joint health opening and scrutiny committee in August. So I'm just trying to give you a flavour. It feels important to give the integrated care partnership a flavour of the sort of the path of the plan. In terms of what the plan is telling us, so if you just move me on a little bit, if that's all right. So there's a whole load of stuff that we have to do, and that's on that slide. It's very similar actually to our integrated care strategy. It has to respond back to the needs of our population. We redid all of that as part of our development of the joint forward plan. So we absolutely did all of that. It has to do a whole load of stuff that the NHS requires us to do. So we have a whole load of core commitments in the NHS, which are described as universal commitments. So it has to respond to those. And it also has to respond to those things that are set out in our operational delivery plan for this year. Sorry, I have to say this, but actually it's just important. But they do enable us to make sure that we're focusing on some of those things like access to primary care, which, if you remember, was a key focus from our communities. It continued to be. It enables us to really get on top of urgent care and also those things at the other end of that, like discharge, etc. So there are some things that do really matter. Move me on a slide, please, Mags. I've expressed how we've expressed our commitment to engaging with our communities. I just wanted to pull out the things that really came out of that, because they are very similar. So they are about access and quality. They are about actually having the wherewithal and the tools to know how to, look after yourself well. And they are about the things that are really pressing, which is about cost and affordability. Those things are the three biggest key themes that came out of that work. That reflects back to the engagement. We reached 2,500 people, I think, in the end. Is that right, Andy? So got 2,500 individual responses, which I think is never enough, but actually it did take us some way to being able to get a sense of what matters. And I said that will continue. Could we just move on, I think, 2 slides? Thank you. I won't labour this because I think I've referenced it a number of times in terms of the stuff that is really happening across South Yorkshire. So in other words, what we're really trying to do, which is really get behind the fact that people live shorter lives than they should do in South Yorkshire, and that difference between some of those key health outcomes between our most affluent and poorest communities. So 19 years in some cases. I know it's no surprise to people, but I think it's really important that we pull that out each time we do this. Is really, really apparent still. Next slide, please. Within the joint forward plan, there were some things that we really absolutely couldn't not ignore, but not actually pull out as key challenges for us. And they are key delivery challenges, but they're really important to our people. So whether this is around A&E, primary care, access I've already mentioned. We've got huge waiting times across South Yorkshire. And they are important to us too, particularly that we've actually we really want to take a very different approach around all of this, but really taking a health inequalities lens on it. And we've also got challenges around mental health as well, access, both more broadly, but out of area placements as well. I'm sharing this because actually it's important in terms of some of the priorities and the things we have to focus on. Next slide, please. In terms of our overarching objectives in our joint forward plan, I hope that they don't surprise you, but we've really thought quite hard about what, as an NHS and an NHS working with others, we absolutely should focus on and where we actually can have influence. So workforce is a massive focus for us. We've just had an NHS national workforce strategy as well. So we recognise we've got to reflect that, but we also have got to reflect that in a way that makes sense for us. So it's not just about the NHS workforce. We've had a couple of good conversations today around how we're really thinking about the entire workforce as one workforce, both paid and unpaid, and much wider than health. Partnership working is a massive focus for us, and I think one of the tests in this is, are we making the best use of that? Can we go further on partnership and collaboration? And it's a major feature of South Yorkshire. It's how we've certainly established the integrated care board, so based on places and seeing places as a cornerstone so hugely. A really big focus on health inequalities and being a prevention first NHS. So whilst I say NHS, actually, we know that that means much more wider as well, because a lot of what we do is very much integrated. We've got a real focus on quality and transformation, no surprises. And there's a big thing in there about how we make the best use of our resources. And I think there are some of the conversations today which are just asking us to look at what the opportunities are if we think very, very differently about how we do some of that. So how we do, really sort of maximise the use of our resources. And then finally, how we use innovation and technology. And I think digital is a huge enabler in that space, but actually it's much more than digital.
I'm very conscious of time, and I want to give Alan sufficient time as well. Does anybody have any burning questions for Will? No, Brill. Okay, in which case. Oh, sorry, online there was a burning question from Nigel. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Oliver. I suppose it's just I mean, I just want to focus down very, very briefly just on oncology services, really. So when you go to page 55, it mentions obviously cancer services. And throughout the old document, what we've got that real commitment, which I'm really pleased about, which is about empowering patients. I think the thing that concerns me is that we know that in Doncaster, particularly around breast screening, and the last data that I received a couple of weeks ago shows that in terms of South Yorkshire, Doncaster's well behind, particularly around breast screening at this moment in time. So in terms of empowering patients, and I suppose giving that choice at point of referral in terms of their pathway, I suppose what I'm asking is what is going to be the big changes for our residents and the people that live in our most deprived communities, and what does it actually mean by nudge, and how is that going to impact on people? Because we know that people from Doncaster have to travel many miles to access services, particularly around oncology, and that's a fact. And I want to know and get a flavour really of what difference this is going to make to the people of Doncaster accessing them services, because at the moment, obviously, that change needs to be put in place, but it's not there.
Thanks, Nigel, for the question. I think one of the fundamental differences it should make is actually we should have equity across all of our communities and across all of our places, and that absolutely should be our focus. I think that's one of the strengths of having a new integrated care board in South Yorkshire, is to really look at our communities, both as individual communities, but also looking at them in terms of the services they receive and how we make sure that there's equity across all. So I think that would be the first thing. You did mention nudge. Now, nudge is something that's related, but actually there's a number of things within that, and that's about how we both at the same time do some pushing and pulling in terms of enabling people to come forward, so that actually they can get help and support in the first place.
Okay, thanks, Nigel. Thanks. Okay, unless anyone's got anything else, I'm going to move on. Alan, can I please bring you in? Sorry, we've come to you late. And I'm assuming everyone's okay to stand. I realise we're running slightly over, but I'm assuming everyone's okay. Alan, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, and good morning, everybody. So this is a quick update on the Mayor's Health Equity Advisory Panel with the unfortunate acronym of HEAP. So the panel was set up to produce a plan to achieve the Mayor's ambition, and I think it's our shared ambition of making South Yorkshire the healthiest region in the country and significantly reducing inequalities, particularly in healthy life expectancy. It comprises a wide range of expertise. There's 16 members to the panel, the directors of public health, strong ICB membership, universities, business, communities, and external representation from the Health Foundation and the Institute for Health Equity. The first meeting was held in April, and I should emphasize that we are not a commission, so we're not taking evidence. We've been asked to try to produce a report as quickly as possible, but it's not quick and dirty. It has to be properly evidenced and rooted in the expertise around the panel table and in the wider communities of South Yorkshire. I think it's remarkable, Chair, how quickly consensus emerged on the panel. There's 16 people, and as I said, spread widely across all of the stakeholder sectors, but consensus emerged very quickly, and the panel coalesced around what it sees as certain essentials. And none of this will surprise you because much of it was in Will's presentation. We need a radical paradigm shift in South Yorkshire if we want to achieve that target towards a social justice or equity perspective and a prevention or health equity in all policies and all sectors perspective. We need to give priority to the outcomes of the most deprived groups in South Yorkshire. There's a strong focus on the social and commercial determinants of health and how we can combat some of the harmful effects of those social and commercial determinants. We want a place-based approach. There is a strong feeling among the panel that we need to be bold in terms of vision and ambition. No reinventing the wheels. And as one panel member put it, go high. So high level vision, high level ambition, because this is supposed to be a 10-year strategy for South Yorkshire. Focus on the big themes is another consensus issue. Set out the basic principles for the next 10 years and the structural changes necessary to ensure that those processes are met, those aspirations are met. And again, particularly focusing on outcomes in the communities with the highest levels of need. It's quite clear, given Will's presentation and our collective knowledge, that this is a massive challenge. So it's not just a matter of producing a report that goes on the shelf and is looked at occasionally. We need a campaign. We need a hearts and minds campaign that engages as widely as possible with the public. And again, I emphasize, particularly with those communities that are in greatest need and who are therefore most excluded. But also, we've recognized that there is a major opportunity. The creation of the MCA, the new governance around health in the region, really important steps that give us a chance to collect all of the expertise in the four authorities across South Yorkshire and work together in a more integrated way than we've achieved, certainly in my living memory. But also we need to recognise there are assets. There are assets in the anchor institutions and much of the progress they've made in this space already. And there are assets in the solidarities of many of our local communities. And The trick will be how we can maximize those assets and add value constantly. So we've agreed the structure of the plan, and it centers around 10 aspirations. For example, to live in communities that are inclusive, empowered, resilient, and safe, to be protected from commercial activities that harm health, and so on. And it also centers around the transformations that are required in the structures and ways of working in South Yorkshire to realise those aspirations. The Mayor asks in particular that this is a short life panel, and therefore we haven't undertaken any original research. We've got some very skilled researchers as members of the panel, that's for sure, and lots of data to draw on. But we've had to lean heavily on the work that's been done previously over longer periods, like Marmot's work in Manchester, the work in the MCA in the West Midlands and in the Greater London Authority, where similar investigations have taken place. So we haven't tried to reinvent those wheels, we've tried to learn from them and take examples that can be properly applied in the setting of South Yorkshire. And of course, there's a lot of talent in the room that we can draw on. So, short life. We're hoping for autumn, at least to produce a draft, but I fear that might be late autumn, if you'll allow.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Alan. On the unfortunate acronym, I once ran a project for Steve Houghton that was called the Barnsley-Newham Partnership, which took us a little bit of time to work out that was unfortunately named and was quite quickly turned to the Newham Barnsley Partnership. But anyway, does anybody have any questions or comments for Alan?
I mean, it all sounds fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to the report. I suppose, you know, I'm conscious there's a lot of work going on around, you know, inclusive economies, stronger communities, and particularly asset-based community development as well, which sounds like it's very much in line with what you're doing, Alan. So how do we make sure that this doesn't just become another piece of work and that it becomes something that we can tangibly take to make things happen? And I'm really conscious of what Gavin said at our last meeting when he said, is left shift about targets? Or, you know, or how do we manage left shift? Well, we have to achieve our targets, but we also have to achieve transformation at the same time. And Gavin said you have to do both. So what you're working in is the transformation space. So for me, I suppose it'd be really good if the panel could come back to us with a model of place-based working, an actual model of how we should operationalize that, because I think that's the bit of kind of data that we're lacking in all of this. And I think a little bit of thinking as well about not just what the principles and aspirations are, but some actual lines of inquiry and practical things that you think we would need to do as a system to make those aspirations real, because we can feed that into the bold ambition groups, etc., but we need this to have some practical implication as well. I'm really happy when you have a draft, you know, to kind of contribute to what the practicalities might look like.
So it's a really helpful suggestion, Kathy. So I've not been involved in all the discussions, but I've been involved in some of the discussions, very rich discussions that Alan's led on, and it has been interesting to see the level of consensus that's come out of this. But the danger, of course, with this sort of work is actually with a group of people who are enormously big brains and lots of expertise, and they start moving off on somewhere. And I think it would be really helpful, given that where we are in the discussion with the Health Equity Advisory Panel, that actually we could almost do like a check-in point in a development session next time. And I think that would just be really good, because the work is in that sort of stage, but it's formative. There are questions I suspect that this group would want of it in terms of its shape and its form. And I just wonder if it would be beneficial just to sort of, particularly around that place-based stuff, Alan, when we're still in that sort of like thinking stage, just to make sure that actually we're making the best use of it in the way that Kathy describes. I'm happy to sort of take that point away and let and myself and Alan and Ruth and others work on that, and then let's get a rich discussion before we start crystallising stuff that actually maybe doesn't sort of sit necessarily with all of what we want to do, but actually gets the richness out of the work that Alan's leading on.
Alan, do you want to add to any of that?
just to say, absolutely fine. We will do whatever you like in terms of presenting a status report on where we are. I think in response to, I mean, Cassie made a truly excellent point, and just sitting in the room this morning for an hour, I've learnt some things that will be written into the draft report. So the question for me is, so we can't go into a huge amount of detail. I think that's not the job of the panel, but there will be detail for sure. Suggestions, recommendations on how to achieve the aspirations. But I think it's fair to say that we see ourselves as a starting point, not an end point. So there needs to be thinking about what the next stages of work are. And I think your suggestion about evolving a South Yorkshire place-based model that reflects the nature of our local communities, you know, is not spatchcocked from somewhere else and imposed top down, but is genuinely developed with those local communities is the way to go. But that is beyond the capacity of this panel. There is a very thin secretariat, and you know, the most important person, Ruth, is currently unwell, so she couldn't be here. So we produce what we can produce in a short space of time with a limited capacity. But then I think we need a plan about what follows on and how we begin to implement and experiment with the ideas that emerge from this plan.
One sentence. I think that could be the focus of the development session. If we could have cited that draft report beforehand and the principles and the ambitions, we can actually focus it on how, looking practically with the partners and co-producing, what that model might look like.
Oh.
Thanks. Gavin Ball, Chief Executive at NHS South Yorkshire. Hi, Alan, thanks for that. I think the work of the panel is incredibly exciting and I think really important. I just wanted to make a slightly obvious point, which is that, you know, clearly around this table we are focused on health and well-being, but there's obviously a major relationship between health and well-being with social and economic development as well. And I think one of the things I'm really interested in is we've defined our ambitions in terms of, I guess, improved health outcomes, but I'd be really interested in a conversation about, well, what's the economic and social benefit of that as well, and bringing those kind of, you know, three corners of the triangle together, I think would be incredibly helpful. So I mean, I just make that point, but I know it's albeit a slightly obvious one. Thanks.
Okay, I completely agree with that. In fact, I've just written the section on the important relationship between the economy and health. And if we don't fix health, and everyone around the table will have seen the Health Foundation report that was widely scattered across the media on Tuesday, showing an increase to 2040 in long-term conditions to 9.1 million. That would equate to, in Yorkshire and Humberside, about 880,000 people with long-term conditions, most of them multi-morbidities. So if we don't try to prevent that is, the economy is going to take a major hit. The OBR has just reported on the economic impact of inactivity, and the cost runs to billions and billions and billions. So there is absolutely no doubt that this plan and our action following the plan, it is crucial to the future prosperity of South Yorkshire. There's absolutely no question about that. So anyone who doubted that health isn't fundamental to economics, you know, that's been blown out of the water, particularly by the OBR report.
Thank you, Alan. I'm conscious of time, so but for what it's worth, I made that exact point just moments ago with colleagues from Treasury, so I'm glad we're speaking off the same page. It says we're on to item 11, which is concluding comments and any other business. So does anybody have any other business? Yes.
So it's Lexa Chappell, Strategic Director for Sheffield City Council. one of the things I said I would raise today as an OB was about the Change in Futures programme, which has been launched within Sheffield, and it's been going on now for 2 years. And it's actually been highlighted as one of the areas of best practice in tackling inequalities, particularly for people with multiple disadvantage. And actually, many things we talked about earlier on today about working very closely with the voluntary sector, as well as co-producing very much with people and individuals, has actually been re-highlighted. And actually, outcomes that we've seen over the last 2 years has actually been improved outcomes for people, health outcomes for people, and increasing accessibility to services. So what the ask is very much is for the ICP, is that we bring back the learning from the Change of Futures programme to a development session, and we could look at how we look at this across South Yorkshire and scale up, because it very much links into bold ambitions, the focus on prevention, and actually a lot of the works that we've talked about so far. And I think I said I'd be in touch with colleagues to go and have separate meetings to go and look at that and then look at it. So that's my proposal for today.
I'm seeing lots of nods around the table, so I'm presuming that's all okay with everybody. So yeah, great for that. Thank you. Anybody online got any AOB? No, anyone else? Which is, can I just say one AOB or just one concluding comment, which is just I'm conscious those last two items in particular, so the Harvard Bloomberg work and the work through the Health Equity Advisory Panel are the pieces of work that I've asked for, and I'm just wanted to put on record really, I suppose, just how grateful I am for the people that are putting in that work and doing very difficult and big things as a result of that work. I know it's not easy, but I do think we're making progress, and I am really quite proud actually of the work that's being done, and I'm sure the outcomes that will result. So just a thank you from me really for everybody that's involved in those pieces of work. The date of the next meeting is the 27th of September. So we will see everybody then, and as ever, thank you very much.